people who really appreciate it, that's somewhat like why that thing is important, right? Is because it can take you somewhere. It can do something that's out of your ordinary state of mind, and how you're, interrupting the inertia, right? Art's very much about interrupting the inertia, being disruptive, right, to your everyday thinking and being and how you are, and saying, stop, look, listen, pay attention.
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte,
Exploring the challenges of the creative call
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art. I'm ready. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. Today we've got hopefully an interesting one for all of you, and for us too. We always like to just dive into something that we find to be interesting, and we're calling this one something like stopping to really be with something. And the sort of the kickoff idea for this, at least, was that when we assume that we already know what something is, when we've already sort of like, oh, okay, I've seen that, know what it is, done. And that's part of the problem, is there's kind of this done thing that we do mentally. And what happens is that we no longer have full engagement with whatever that thing is. We no longer are open and present with something to see if it actually has new things to say to us, to show to us, new things to learn. Because the thing is that, at least in my opinion, there is way more that you could learn from something, right? You could probably indefinitely spend time with something, and you could continue to just learn something about whatever it is forever and ever and ever. Like it probably goes that way. So I thought it would be an interesting thing to get into, because I think that we do this all the time, and I do think that there is a function to it. Like I do think it's actually useful, and because we can't necessarily just be walking along the street and just stopping and spending an hour with every little thing that we, every blade of grass that we see on the side of the road. But it might be important that we do spend some time with those things, right? And that in many ways, this is precisely what artists are doing in their mediums, is they're spending time, like real present, open time with something, not with any preconceived notions of what it is, but just open to accepting whatever is sort of revealed to them, without trying to make it sound too esoteric. But in many ways, I think that's what it is. And so I'll just leave it there, because I feel like I've I've opened up a couple of things. That's probably more than enough to start with. So Brandon, what are your opening statements?
My opening statements. Well, Evan, I feel like this is an interesting topic to discuss, and it's one of those things. It's like, I guess it's one of those things that on the surface doesn't seem like much, but kind of the very essence of the talk is, if you stop and you sit with it, you see there's way more than you realize. Like it unravels itself. And as you were talking, I was thinking about, man, wow, that's like writing a screenplay. Just the way you're describing it, I was like, yeah, that's what a story is. You stop and you spend time with characters in a situation, and then and the creation of an idea, from the seed of an idea all the way into like the actual fruition of it, like where it becomes an actual, like even like it becomes a full script or a full movie or something, or maybe a novel. If that's, I've never written a full novel yet, but I think the there's all this time you spent with these kind of characters and these situations. And as you do, the more time you spend with it, the more things kind of unfold and get revealed. And I find that, like there's this idea we've talked about it a bit before with story being half baked. And it's like, yeah, you didn't put it in the oven long enough, like you didn't bake it fully. And it's kind of like, and now we're trying to eat this half baked meal and it just doesn't, it's not right. Right. So, you want an idea that's fully baked. You also, to take that metaphor further, you don't want to leave it in too long. You don't want to like overcook it in a sense. And I would say like overcooking a story, like thinking about it too much, like trying to get too complicated with it. It's like, okay, just like, let's go back to basics. Like, what are we trying to do here? So I think there's something interesting about this is like, yeah, like, the essence of art in a lot of ways is if you're going to create anything, you got to stop and be with it. And I think that's something that maybe if someone out there doesn't feel like they're creative, that's where I would say, hey, maybe this conversation can help you start with that. Could you stop and just be with something? And maybe you'll begin to find you're just moving all the time. And so you don't think you're creative because you're always off busy doing something. But maybe if you stopped, you might actually see that you actually have more creativity or more creative access than you realize. The other thing that I'm really interested in getting into a conversation about is inertia. And inertia is kind of something in motion, kind of has this tendency to stay in motion, And I find emotionally, that is where inertia really kind of plays a role in my life, where it's like I'm stressed or anxious or worried, and you're just in this, or I'm just in this inertia of like, yeah, like I'm just trying to get through this, and then I can resolve that feeling. And then I move on to, eventually, stress and anxiety, either it normalizes and you just get used to it, or you move into a new emotion because something else changes or shifts. But I find when you get into an emotion, or when I get into an emotion, I think this is true for most people, we get into emotion we like, we never want it to end and we just want to keep doing it. But when you get into an emotion you don't like, you just want to get out of it as soon as you possibly can. But this is my point. We don't have an inclination to stop when we're in an emotion we like because we're just enjoying it so much. But when we are in an emotion we don't like, we don't want to stop because we don't want it to last any longer than it has to. So I think there's something about this. We kind of need to stop the inertia at some point to change and shift. And yeah, anyway, there's a lot, man. I don't know. Let's just dig into it. What else you got?
I know there's a lot of stuff there. Like I love this thing of, yeah, like slowing down, stopping, like in a way is still, it's all speaking to this thing of being present with it. And like you're saying with emotion, it's like, when we're in a joyful state of being, we're already in that sort of stop space. We don't really have to think about doing that, right? Because we're not trying to get away from it. We're actually just we're just in it, and we're just being with it. Whereas when we have a negative emotion, we're just trying to get away from it. We're not stopping just to be with it. But again, like that's something that, great artists go, let's stop and be with this thing and write a song or write a novel or something and really go into that. And what you were also saying about storytelling as well, like screenwriting or however you might tell your stories, a lot of them come from a place of trying to explore some sort of theme or feeling or intuition that you have about what it is to be human, right? Like that's one thing that I remember when I first started learning about how to write a screenplay. Like one of the first things that I learned was you've got to identify what's the theme of this thing, and that theme is typically some sort of philosophical, observation or comment about life, and then it's like, okay, so that's what I'm curious about exploring, and I'm exploring it through this story, and there's going to be these characters, and you enter into that thing not necessarily knowing what's gonna happen there. Maybe this theme is something that you discover to be true, or maybe you discover that there's more to it than you initially. I mean, that's in a way you hope to discover these things as you go through it. You know, that's part of that. As part of that process, right? There was something else that you said too that I thought, I love the bread analogy. Or sort of the oven. Yeah, sorry. I was just, the oven thing just put bread in my mind. And I was like, yeah, you know, it's totally true. You know, it's like you can underbake something, you know, underbaked bread, but you can also leave it in the oven for too long, or you can also put too much stuff in the bread, you know, where it's just like, okay, like, because bread on it's a good, well-made bread on its own, simple is terrific, you know, and you can throw some other things like, you know, some cheese. Okay, I can roll with some cheese and bread, you know, if you bake it with that. Or you throw some like maybe some ham or bacon in that. Okay, I can roll with that. Or some tomato. Yeah, okay, we can do that. Oh, all right, now we're throwing in some olives. Okay, like that. Now I'm starting to feel like there's maybe a bit too much going on. I love me some olives, but maybe that's a bit too much. That's going. This is a complete. I don't know what this has to do with the opening topic, but that was just what was twirling in my head, where it's like, yeah, you can get to a point where you're doing just too much with something. Again, I don't know exactly what that has to do with the subject we entered into it, but I just needed to go on that little side journey because I liked it. I thought, yeah, that's got a lot to do with creativity and art as well. Yeah, go for it.
Well, I think using your bread analogy to take that further, the idea that, you know, like, okay, so you got plain bread, whatever, and then you throw something in it and it gives it a little bit of flavor, a little design, a little whatever. It's kind of like when you're creating a story, it's like, and you talked about theme, you might have one theme and you're a story tackles this theme and it might have some sub themes that are dancing around. But one thing that's really important when you're telling a story is to not try to throw too many themes in. You're going to mess everything up because it overcomplicates it. It's like, it just like, there's a certain amount of, we don't want everything in the kitchen sink like thrown in. We don't want it all, right? We can only take in so much at a time. And there's a thing where they talk about when you try to make a movie like two genres at the same time, it usually just fails. It just doesn't work. And they say that like there's drama and there's comedy. And there's a subgenre called dramedy. And when you're playing with kind of putting two genres together, you need to figure out which one you're honoring more than the other. And it's like, you have to kind of pick a favorite. Like, are we making and so to bring this back to a bread analogy, it might be like, are we using, say, ham as the first ingredient, and then we base everything around the ham that we put in? Or are we using olives as the first ingredient, and then we're basing everything around the olives? Now, the ham might work with the olives, but we got to remember, what was the initial ingredient that we were using as the base ingredient to build everything else upon? And so I think like, stopping with something and thinking about this and kind of considering it. And, there's a certain amount of like, you start with a base of something, right? And anyway, I want to kind of round this back to where this conversation originated, at least from how you shared your idea with me, which was like stopping to notice a flower. So you stop and you notice the flower, and then you notice the garden around it. But I think it is important to remember that we stopped to notice the first thing. And that's where things originated from, because you can get like, I feel like life is kind of like that. It can all of a sudden, it gets really complicated really quickly. And another way that I would use this analogy is like stopping to notice a flower, is stopping to just notice where I'm at. in life. Like I happen to be sitting in a chair at a desk, talking to a friend, whatever. It's like, this is what's happening. And then from there, you can begin to build your reality outward. But, like if you start to try to throw in complicated ideas about the present moment, all of a sudden you're not in the present moment anymore. You know what I mean? And I think when we get lost, I think part of this conversation is about when you get lost and you get an inertia and you get off and you get confused or things are just out of hand. It's like, stop, let's be, let's acknowledge. And then, and it's not all about the flower, but we notice, okay, the flower got me to stop or the moment got me to stop, and then we can build upon. Anyway, I don't know where that's going, man. I just feel like it's part of the conversation.
I can pick it up. It's like, in a way, it's like this acknowledgement of nothing is just this. Like nothing is just something. It's not just some flower. It's not just some tree. It's not just some painting, right? But part of why I think that as we get older, we can lose so much of our wonder and awe of the world is because of this thing we're talking about. And I was sharing this with you before, is one of the major things that gets in the way is our categorizing, our naming and labeling of things, which, don't get me wrong, it's a very useful tool that we have for communication. But part of the problem is that we begin to just mistake the label for the thing itself, which is not the same. One of the things I've heard from Alan Watts on this type of subject is the word water doesn't get you wet.
Yeah.
Right? Like they're completely different things, right? It's like the word water, yes, is a useful thing for if we're just trying to talk about something, but it is a world apart from the experience of jumping into a lake, and feeling the water, experiencing the water. They're not even in the same thing, but as you're talking about inertia, right? The inertia of where we put our focus and attention in our lives is so often on, like all these abstract things of places where we think we need to be or go, or who we think we're supposed to be or need to be, and da-da-da-da-da. We can spend so much time just lost in these thoughts where, part of what I liked about how you came with some of the title of this conversation was this thing of like, let's stop, or slow down, right? Because we need to interrupt some of that inertia so that we can actually be with reality, right? And maybe reconnect with some of that wonder and awe and all of these things, where we take some time to just, sit with a tree, right? And really just take the thing in, like really notice it, look at it, see its characteristics, and not just walk past it with just sort of in some distant place in your mind. You just go, oh, there's a tree, right? It's like, yeah, I get it. We can't stop to just like, because there are other things in life too that are important to do. But when we're never stopping to notice anything, really, when trees are just words now, and we actually don't know what it's like to actually just be with a tree anymore. I mean, this might be sounding really hippy dippy shit, but this is not small stuff. Like this is what artists are concerned with. This is what, being a mindful, present human being is about, right? Like being really aware is about this very thing, being tuned into what is that thing. And it's not just, look, being out and and noticing things in the world or whatever. Like that is one way in which definitely we can spend more time with, but it's being more stopping to notice inner states and stuff as well, which is something that you've been alluding to as well in this conversation.
So you're talking about inner states of feeling, not, I thought you meant like highways.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, not interstates, inner states of being, or just noticing our bodies to a large degree, noticing like how our body feels. Sometimes that's usually the first thing that you do if you've ever been through some sort of, group where you're just doing like sort of like, okay, let's just like get grounded. It's very, very much a thing that happens in like acting classes and yoga classes and stuff or whatever, where it's like, hey, let's just take a second, just check in. Let's first notice our breathing. How's our breathing? Oh, holy shit, my breathing is not good right now. And I go, okay, let's breathe a little bit more deeper. And now let's notice our body. Oh wow, I've just been how long have I been holding tension in this place right now, right? And we just become aware of all of these things that, like, it's not like they weren't there before. We were just not paying attention to them, right? And so that's part of what stopping and or slowing down is a part of. It's like, let's actually just notice real things that are going on right now, because most of it, we were talking about this a while back, because for probably most of us, we're so caught up in our thoughts, and we're so caught up in thinking about shit that happened yesterday or last year or 20 years ago, and thinking about, tomorrow. And it's like, and am I going to stay at this job, or am I going to do this thing, or it's like, and do I want to stay in this house, or no, like, or I want to live in a house like that, like and look, I'm not putting any judgment on those kinds of thoughts. They're as valid as any thought, but the amount of time that we spend with those thoughts, trapped in a place where, well, these things aren't real things in a certain kind of a way. These are all just like hypotheticals and imaginary, projections or remembrances about certain things, but it's not an actual present reality other than the thoughts that we're giving it. And just taking a moment to come back in to just notice very, very simple, true things about what's going on. Oh, my breathing is really shallow right now. And like I remember from a Dan Mill, I'm going to pass it over to you, but I remember from a Dan Millman book that said something like, that like three mindful breaths in a day can change your entire day, or something like that. I didn't say that well, but that's the correct sentiment. And actually just one other thing that popped into my head, again from Dan Millman, it's like a presence check-in thing. It's like 3 questions that he has, which are: am I breathing? Is my body relaxed? Am I moving with ease? Just simple things, just like, oh, okay, let's stop and really just be with something. And that something right now is just, what is this state right now? Because we're very often not even aware of what that actually is, not mindfully.
Something that's kind of coming up for me is thinking about, okay, so like, because what we're talking about is how we think we know stuff, and we think things exist when they actually don't. And this is kind of easier to comprehend when you think about, like, I suppose, like emotions and stuff. It's like, well, it feels very real. It feels like that exists, but it doesn't actually exist, and not in the way you think it exists. Like, it's not constant. So like an example that I can use is like if everybody on the other end of this conversation, yourself included, have it, make a fist, right? Close your hand, make a fist. Now open up your hand. Where'd the fist go? The fist was a thing, it existed, but now it doesn't. It changed, right? And so it doesn't exist anymore. And you're like, yeah, but the fist, then you can close your hand again, you make another fist, and you go, okay, well, it exists again. And then you open your hand, it doesn't exist. And like, this is the thing about kind of the present moment, is like this thing you think you know exists, and yet it doesn't exist. It's like there, and yet it isn't there. And it's like, oh, it can be there, and it's not there. And so it's kind of like when we're in an emotional state or we're in an inertia of something, that exists only because you're squeezing your hand in tension. You talked about your body, like if my body relaxed or in tension, it's like, well, you're stressed out because your body's all squeezed up and all tense and all fucking stressed out, and you're making a fist with your body, and all of a sudden you stop and you breathe and you relax and you like move it, and it's like all of a sudden you open up the fist and it no longer exists. And yet you're no longer stressed. But when you're in the inertia of stress, it's so real and you can't get out of it. It just is. It's like, but it isn't. It isn't, because basically what's happening is you're in the inertia of tension. You're in the inertia of squeeze, right? And so
whatever thought is creating that tension. Well, that's all I want to say. Chiming in.
All right, he's chiming in. He's chiming in, folks. Well, I wasn't sure if he could hear you because the mic was over by me. But yes, but anyway, yeah. So like so I think what's interesting with this conversation is part of stopping is seeing that something only exists because you're in the inertia of it existing. It doesn't actually exist. It only exists because you won't let go of it. And when you let go of it, poof, it's gone. Like it suddenly is just opening your hand is no longer a fist anymore. And you can go squeeze it up again. You can go do it again. But the other thing too is like, it's not reality. And I think this is a really important discernment to make about the like human experience that we're in. That when you think of yourself, like let's take a more kind of complicated idea. And this is one I struggle with every now and then, but it's like, oh, I don't feel good enough. That doesn't exist. That's only me creating an environment, creating a scenario where that, and I don't even know if you can call it not good enough, but that's how I interpret it. And you go, okay, well, this is what not good enough is, and this is what it feels like, and I'm like in it, and I can't get out of it, and I'm stuck in it. I just don't feel good enough, and I'm insecure, and blah, 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 whatever. But the thing is like, you got to stop. I think that's part of the interesting thing about this conversation. You stop, you look around, and it's like, you kind of take it in and you become like, I'm not good enough in comparison to some idea that I have out there about what I'm supposed to do, what I'm supposed to control, what I'm supposed to add up to. And that isn't real. I made that up. But like, I'm not adding up to this thing that I made up. All of a sudden, I'm not making it up anymore, and I'm good enough and everything's fine. Totally perfect. So it's like, how fucking real was that? That was all bullshit. Sure felt real though while I was in it. So I think that, one of the interesting things about this conversation, which just kind of dawns on me, is like, yeah, like if you are in an inertia that you don't like, kind of try to see how it doesn't exist and that you're making it exist as though it's a constant. And it's just like, and also I think the idea that the world is doing it to you is something that you need to kind of challenge every now and then. It's like, the world isn't making you that. You're making you that. And then the world is reinforcing that back at you because you're using the world to help you do what you're trying to do. Like you're using it to confirm what you're trying to do. So like, if you're acting all insecure and then people like, they're not responding to you well and you go, oh, people don't like me. You created an environment that people don't like, and then you attributed it to yourself. But that environment only exists because you created it. Like people don't like you if you're pestering them, for example, or you're being super insecure and needy and they have other things to do. Like people might not like that. And so then you go, oh, well, it's me. They don't like it. It's like, That's not true. It's like you're creating an environment that people don't like and then attributing it to yourself as though you are the thing. You know, you're creating the just relax. You know, like, you see what I'm saying? It's just like, my point is that I think when you stop and you take things in as they are, and you don't, you know, because like, this is how I think inertia works, Evan. I think what happens is you go, okay, I want to do this thing and I don't want any of this thing. And you start on this trek, right? And you start going along and it feels a certain way. And then you start feeling a certain way and you don't realize that you left on this journey of like doing this thing and that you can stop. It's like, well, I have to go to work. I have to pay the bills. I have to do all this. And that's all that's all the have to. And so you're on this trail, kind of this trek adventure, like doing the shit, stressing out about not being able to pay your bills and doing whatever. And like none of that exists other than you are in the belief that it's real. And the thing is like, we get caught up because we go, well, I still got to pay my bills. I'm like, do you have to pay your bills right now, this second, like this moment? Do you have to pay them right now? No. Okay. So technically, in the reality, you don't have to pay your bills because this is all that exists. But you're like, in the future, I have to. It's like, okay, that's fair enough. But you're in the future. You're not here. That's why I think this conversation is so interesting, because it's like, yeah, get yourself out of the future for a second, tap into this present moment. You can go back to the future, but maybe you can go back to the future a little bit better, because right now you think you're living in the moment and you're not. You're living in the future. Because right now, unless you're paying your bills right now or whatever it is that you're stressing about, you don't have to do that right now. It's not real. It doesn't exist right now. And I think the thing is that we're reluctant to do that because we think if we somehow let go of this thing, that somehow we're not being responsible or we're losing control or it's dangerous. And it's like, it's not dangerous to like stop, take a breath, relax, recalibrate, start a new inertia forward. Anyway, I don't know. I mean, this is a deep talk. It's hard for me to even finish that thought, but that's what I got.
Yeah, no, it's making me think about how, you know, life is about all of these processes, and we are part of that process too, and part of that anxiety that we carry around with us is this, you know, I think this mistaken notion that if we don't do something, even if we don't know what that is, but we've got to do something, because if we don't do something, everything's going to fall apart. But yet somehow the world continues spinning, and, you know, the seasons keep coming, and, you know, all of these processes seem to continue on without necessarily needing some sort of like thing driving this thing to happen, right? And I think that that's part of the equation that keeps us from stopping, because we don't think we can, right? Like the earth's going to fall out from underneath us if we ease up on the gas, right? What's going to happen? Right? And you know, and there's a time for everything. Sometimes there might be moments where we need to like be on the gas, but again, it's a balance thing where we also need to have that other side to balance out those moments of just where we're speeding ahead. Because who's to say that the thing that you might find right here, right now, in this moment, if you stopped, is any less important than whatever you think is out over there, right? What if the thing that's right here in front of you has exactly the thing that you need, has exactly the answer that you're looking for? And one could argue pretty convincingly, at least in my mind, that that's actually the only place where you're going to find that thing, right? Because the answer to whatever problem we have in our heads about something going forward is like, for example, you got to pay your bills. Well, I would imagine that the reason you might have anxiety about paying your bills is because maybe at the moment or how things are looking, you might not have the money, or there's not going to be enough at that time or something, or you might be afraid that there's not going to be enough at the time, right? You might, but you might not. It could be, who knows what that situation could be. Whatever it is, I mean, the only place that you can do something about that is, again, right now. Right? And just worrying about something in the future, being able to look into the future can be helpful in the sense that it can say, it's like, oh, okay, you know what? I have this bill that I have to pay, and it's looking like things might be a little bit tight. So what can I do to make sure that that's not a problem? Right? What can I do? Is there anything I can do right now in this moment? Mm-hmm. Right? But sitting around spinning our wheels, just stressing about it is like, what? Oh, okay. Like you said, like you can do that. You can clench your fist right now if you want, and your arm's going to get sore and it's going to hurt, but you don't have to do that. Right? You don't have to do that thing. So, it's coming back to the present, is even in the face of a problem that's on the horizon, is still your best option at confronting that problem, right? Because it's like, okay, well, what's the step I can do right now? And that's paying attention to something real. That's coming back, that's stopping and slowing down, as opposed to, oh God, what happens if I can't? And then, and then these things happen, and this thing happens, and this thing happens. It's like, that's not solving the problem, right? You might have a real problem, but that thing that you're doing is not solving the problem. You're just making yourself sick. And you don't need to make yourself sick, right? But you can become present and ask yourself, what I can do right now. Is there action that I can take that will help so so I do have that money to pay the bill? Oh, you know what? There is. I can actually just, I can eat lean for the next couple of weeks, and actually if I do this, and then boom, okay.
Yeah.
No problem. Done. And then then you got the next month to worry about, I guess. But, you can only fully address problems in the present. Mm-hmm. Only by really understanding what the problem is can you actually do something about it. But that whole other game is a really, it's like a sadistic game that we play on ourselves. Hey everybody, this is Evan, and this episode is brought to you by my book. Yes, I recently released a book called The Actor's Awakening: Connecting Spirituality to Craft. Expand yourself as an actor and your craft through a spiritual perspective. Take a journey that will explore universal philosophies and insights to help you understand human nature in a profound way, and develop practices to take your work to another level. Again, that's The Actor's Awakening: Connecting Spirituality to Craft. Available on Kindle and paperback on Amazon. And as always, if you like the show, please subscribe.
Yeah, the whole idea of getting back to the moment, I think there's something about presence which seems like we're not being responsible, when we're coming back to the moment, but it's like that is really the only responsible thing you can do. Worrying about the future and all of this stuff. I think there's like there is something that's kind of necessary about acknowledging where things are going, seeing like, hey, like we're headed towards an iceberg. And actually here, I was thinking about this actually as you were talking, motorcycle riding. When you're on the twisty roads, when you're and you start to push yourself, you're speeding along, you're moving along pretty quickly, and you're coming up to a corner, And as you get better and better, you can kind of maintain that speed for longer and longer and closer into that corner. And then you kind of like, you downshift, you slow down, you brake, you do whatever, and you manage that corner, and then you take that corner at appropriate speed. And as you're kind of coming out of it, you like can start speeding up again. You can like whip right out of it. And it's a lot of fun. It's a great experience. There's a thing in motorcycle riding which they call object fixation, which is when you look at where you don't want to go and you fixate on it and you end up crashing into it. And like, that's what worry is a lot like. It's kind of like, oh, I'm going to end up here. I'm going to end up here. I'm going to end up here. And it's like, that's exactly where you ended up. You hit the wall, so to speak, because you were focused on hitting the wall. The idea is that when you're like, I love motorcycle riding because it's one of the activities I do that makes me more present than anything. Because when you're just present and you're focused on what you're doing and where you want to go and how that feels, and you're with it, and like, especially when you kind of like, as I've gotten better, I've become more one with the bike in a sense, whereas like, I know how it feels. I got a sense for the tires. I got a sense for the traction. I got a sense for, the rev, like how much power I got out of this gear, and I got a feel for how downshifting is going to break me, how it's going to slow me down or whatever. And this symbiotic kind of connection to the thing, it's out of this world. I don't know how to describe it. It's fucking awesome. And people who don't motorcycle ride, they might not understand what this is like, but I mean, if you're an actor, you know what I mean, because like, if you've ever gotten into the zone in acting and you're just so fucking connected to the person, and you're just boom, things are happening. It's just like, and you're almost like, you're out of your body in a sense, you're in your body more than you've ever been. And at the same time, you're out of it, like, and you're just, it's happening. I think that something we're kind of talking about is we're talking about being in the happening of it. It's like, yes, if I don't turn my bike, I'm headed off a cliff. I'm going to die. But if I'm riding a motorcycle focused on how I'm going to head off a cliff and die, motorcycle riding is no fun. But if I'm, like, I sometimes am thinking about it, like as I'm coming around a corner, because I've like definitely amped up my speed, and I'm coming around a corner and I do this great corner and I'm really happy with myself and whatever. And I do have these little moments of like, oh, if I went off the edge, that would have been real bad. Then I just move on and I carry on. But I think it's important that I acknowledge that. I think it's important that I'm aware of the risk that's at play here. I think, there's always this quality, but I would argue that life is risky, period. And, risk avoidance is good to a degree, but then fleeting at a certain point. Like, you have to kind of understand that every time you step out of your door and walk outside, you have a risk of getting either hurt, injured, or whatever. But you walk around under this whole perception of like, what if I get hurt? What if I get sick? What if this happens? Like, if that's how you live, your life sucks. And I equate that to motorcycle riding. If all you're thinking about is how you might crash and all these horrible things that are going to happen to you, it's not going to be a fun activity. But life is the same fucking thing. Unless you want to go hide in your room and like just stay still, but that's fucking horrible too. And people that do that, where they live so safe and so bundled and so like isolated and like secure, you're making a fist of your life. And of course it doesn't feel great. You feel safe, but it's like, is that worth it? You know what I mean? I think that something about this conversation that's dawning on me as we're talking about it is like, being present allows you to actually take appropriate risk. If you're not present, you can't actually take a risk, because everything's either in the future or the past, and it's based on some bullshit that doesn't exist. But when you're present, you can do things, you can respond, you're sharp, you're on the fucking ball. But if you're not, yeah, of course, you can't take the risk. You can't do the thing. You can't interact, You have to kind of be in the moment and be like, I don't know how this is going to turn out. Let's see what happens, but I'm here. And then boom, it goes a certain way, and you stay in that moment. Like, I call it like hanging in the pocket. Like, you're responding and you're real with it. You're sharp. You're like on it. And you're, like, one thing you do, another thing, I want to pass this on to you, but one other thing, when you're riding a motorcycle, you want to try to keep as far a view in front of you as possible, because you want to see what's coming and you want to have the most preparation and the most options to deal with what's coming up. Something breaks, something jumps in the road, whatever. But at the same time, you're riding on a road that if it's uneven or it's rocky or there's, say, sand or wetness or whatever that's happening, you also kind of glance down every now and then at your front wheel and kind of check, like, hey, what's happening in front of me? What's happening right in front of me right now? And this helps you, as you're looking into the future, you're also recognizing that, hey, like, where am I and what does the ground look like beneath me at the very moment I'm in? And so I would say there's a certain element of presence, which is like, check in with what's happening right now, because like if I take a corner and it's all sandy or icy or something, it's, taking it at the speed that I take it at under perfect conditions is just unwise and unsafe. And so, if I see hazards coming up on the road, I look at that and I acknowledge the fact that I'm on uneven, maybe less predictable ground, and I need to act accordingly. And so I think that there's a certain amount of, you have to be present in the moment and acknowledge where you're at, because life, you can look into the future and it goes, looks perfect, looks perfect, looks perfect. But if you're not paying attention to where you are, it might not be perfect where you are. And part of the fun and risk of life is responding to the imperfection of life. The only way you're going to do that is through presence. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the corner on the road that's on the edge of a cliff, you only need to be concerned about if you don't intend on turning. You know what I mean? Like it's but yeah, it's like it's kind of a good example because it shows a certain kind of absurdity. Because in a situation where, like, it doesn't even have to be on a motorcycle, even just driving a car or a bicycle or whatever it is. It's like, yeah, there's curves and twists and all kinds of things that you will encounter. There's so many dangers with operating any kind of vehicle. And we don't freak out over every single little corner that we see coming up. We like, it's just an insane thing to do. And it's because, like, okay, yeah, because I see it coming up and I will turn when the time is appropriate, because I can't turn now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great example.
If I turn now, I'm actually going to get myself into trouble. Yeah. Like if I turn now, I'm going to drive into a car or into a fence or something else, It's like, so you respond at the appropriate moment. And, and that is an advantage of foresight, right? But it's like, the problem is that we're just like, oh, there's a corner coming up, I'm going to drive into it. And it's just like, why? Like, just turn at the corner. It's like, oh, okay. So, and even just saying it sounds so absurd, but this is very much the mental game that we play on ourselves all the time. Yeah, of course.
Okay, just real quick. If you've turned the corner too late and you're already going off the edge, I could see the concern. And I think when we worry, a lot of the time we're like, oh, I've already missed the corner and I'm headed for the, it's like, and really and realistically, the corner is way up ahead and you're not even there yet. And I love this analogy of, like, if I turn now before I even get to the corner, I run off the road and, so that's where presence becomes, yeah, I'm going to turn at the appropriate time. When the right time appears, I will make the right moves and do the right things. And if that's now, I'll do it now. And if it's a few moments, I'll do it in a few moments. But I think there's a certain amount of, when we worry and we get an anxiety, we already see it as though we've already missed the corner and we're way beyond being able to do anything about it. And it's like, I think that's where it's another great moment to stop and actually ask, is that true?
Yeah, and it's like, in many ways, like the fear and the anxiety, it's like you're heading towards the corner, and it's like I think it puts you more at risk of just like hitting the gas, where it's like, as opposed to just like, okay, corner's coming up. What can you do right now, right? To come back into the present. It's just like, okay, well, right now, actually everything is fine, right? Right now I can go as needed. When I get a little closer, I can hit the brake. I can start to slow down. I mean, you could slow down right now if that made you feel like, if that relieves some pressure or whatever. Sure, you could do that. Might be really early, but whatever. Like you can, that's your decision to make, but you can only make it in that moment. But that's, I mean, I don't know. I feel like this has been an interesting exploration. But I feel like I kind of feel like going in a bit of a different direction now at this point.
I think we made the point.
I think, yeah. I mean, I was expecting us. I mean, there's so many things in our conversations and in these podcasts. We end up heading down some avenues that are unexpected. I'm just looking at this again. So she said, stopping to really be with something. Stopping to really be with something. Coming back to something, and just because for myself, when we were having the conversation about this topic, and what was helpful for me, and I think it was helpful for you too, as I was trying to explain my thought, is I was looking at a picture that you have in your place. You have this picture of these three wolves in a snowy forest kind of thing, and it's a great picture, and I've seen it many times. But in trying to explain it, I realized that it's like, oh yeah, this is the perfect example, because yes, I have seen the picture and I know very generally of what it is, but I had never taken a moment to actually go and stand right in front of it and really look at it and really notice it and just see what it does to me. And this is what I think is, there's like kind of a distinction between thinking about something and being with something, which is an important part of this conversation. Because so much of us are, so much of the time when even when we're maybe taking something in, we're mindfully taking, we're just thinking about it, right? We're just like, okay, so I'm looking at this picture. Okay, there's three wolves there, and there's a couple of two trees there, and and it's like, and part of, and this is part of the beauty of art, is because art in many ways is actually trying to say, well, just be with this, right? Try to shut your brain off a little bit and experience this from another faculty of your being, right? Take this thing in. How does it make you feel? Does it do something to you? And and there's people, I'm starting to understand, I'm not a really big art person, I guess, in a way, like where I go and I stand and go to museums and I stand in front of paintings. I mean, I do that and enjoy doing that from time to time, but that's so much of what art is about, is just like, well, just go and put yourself in front of this thing, and what does it do to you? Right? And maybe it's nothing. Maybe it doesn't do anything to you or anything for you. That's it. It doesn't have to, right? But maybe this one doesn't do anything, but maybe that one next to it does something for some reason. Maybe you're just like, I don't know, this one I just feel uncomfortable. This makes me feel uncomfortable. Oh, okay, that's interesting. Like, and you can explore that, right? And it's like, well, what is it about this thing that's making, and and you can go on a whole journey with taking in art that way. And I think that that's, we're people who really appreciate it. That's somewhat like why that thing is important, right? Is because it can take you somewhere. It can do something that's out of your ordinary state of mind, and how you're, interrupting the inertia, right? Art's very much about interrupting the inertia, being disruptive, right? To your everyday thinking and being and how you are, and saying, stop, look, listen, pay attention to this thing. And one last thing, I'll hand it back to you, but there was, and I've shared this on the podcast before, but I always love bringing this up because it's a fascinating little, not necessarily like, it's not really an experiment, but it's a, I suppose you could call it, it's a bit of a thought experiment where go to, like, something in nature is usually good for this type of thing. Go and place yourself in front of some sort of natural thing. Could be a tree, could be a flower, could be a field, could be in front of the ocean or something. Place yourself in front of some natural thing, and then it's not really asking yourself a question, but it's like an instruction. It's like, okay, now describe this thing without describing its parts. And it's a fascinating thing that happens when you do that, because it places you in a wordless state, which shows how our words are a kind of they're a reduction of things. They're a division of things. It just breaks things up, right? But it doesn't actually really take in something as a whole. It doesn't really, the words don't really again give the experience. Like the word water doesn't get you wet, right? And so when you give yourself that instruction of like, well, describe this thing that you're seeing without describing its parts, right? You think of a flower, right? Just imagine some kind of, right now in my head, I'm just thinking of all the crocuses and snowdrops because they're starting to bloom right now. It's like, okay, well, describe this thing without describing its parts. And it's like, how do you do that without being like, oh, it's green and it's purple and it's white, and those are all parts of it. And its stem is a part, its petals are a part. Like all of these things are just breaking something down into pieces, right? But when you go, it's like, okay, now try and describe this thing without doing that. And in that, at least for me, I find that when I do this little sort of exercise, it places me into a wordless state where I do enter into a kind of a deeper just presence with something, where now I'm like, okay, well, there's nothing to say. So the only thing left for me to do is to just really be with this thing, where I'm really now just like looking at it, and in a way feeling it in a way that I can't describe. It's like I can't describe it, but I can feel this thing where I couldn't feel it before, when I was just, my mind was just being like, oh, look, it's purple and it's leaning to the side, and it's, it's, yes, it is all of those things, but it's also a lot more than that. So yeah, I don't know, I'll leave it at there. I don't know if that gives you something to jump off of.
I guess, I come back to this kind of idea that there's a happening, and that it is happening without the words. And it's happening without this description, or like, and like words are just like symbols, right? Like symbols and ideas of ways to kind of communicate something. And also like, There also this saying, right, which I like a lot, which is that, we call it spelling because it's casting a spell. And I think that, when we say we know something, we cast a spell and we go, oh, this is what it is. It's like, that's a tree. And that's a spell. That's how you spell tree, but it's like, that's, and then when you describe it and label it and categorize it, then it becomes kind of this thing. And it's like, well, I've seen a tree before in a way that, but it's like, that is that tree, And also like one thing I do right now is I'll take my motorcycle, I'll go drive down to the ocean, and then I'll find some beach and I'll sit on like a rock or the sand, and I'll just look out at the sunset. I like to go at sunset. And the colors are incredible and everything's just so incredible. And it's like, I can talk all day about that. I could try to use the most poetic words to try and let you be there with me, but you'll never be there with me. There's nothing like it. There's nothing. I take pictures, I show you the pictures. You don't understand. There was this moment, Evan, where I was at this one beach and there's these like kind of little pebbles everywhere. And I was on this big rock. And then as the waves, they hit the pebbles, but they hit them kind of on an angle. And it would do this thing where it goes, and then the next wave, and it just this beautiful, cool sound. And you just hear the water just kind of like rippling along this, I don't know how to describe that, but it was like music, like harmony. And you have to stop and pay attention. You have to be with it for it to even matter or make a difference. And I don't know, it's interesting because I remember that, but what I find fascinating about this conversation is I feel like a big part of it is about resetting. You talk about that wolf painting that you look at, right? And I agree. I remember when I first saw it as a kid, because we've had it in my family for a long time. I remember thinking, oh, it's beautiful. It's such a cool photo. And then moved on and played soccer or something. But more and more as I got older, I stopped and I would look at it. I would be like, oh yeah, and I would kind of start to try to just be with it. And as I did, the stories of each wolf started to come out a little bit more. And I guess I'm like, I guess that's what this one is about. And I guess, but and I don't know if that's real. I don't really know. But the thing is there's the world that gets filled in, and, and the thing starts to come to life, and there's a quality, and there's relationship, and there's all this beautiful. And so I feel like when you stop and you kind of reset something you think you get to kind of almost live again, and I think something about this conversation which really kind of dawns on me is that I think that's kind of what it's about for us a lot of the time, because I feel like the inertia of life is we get on this track, what am I doing? Where am I going? What is happening? What are we up to? It's just kind of this thing that we're constantly almost indoctrinated with and pushed towards. And so it doesn't always work. And, you stop appreciating the fact that you're alive and that you're living and you're breathing and you're feeling, and these things, there's a happening. And you totally miss out on the happening because you're so busy trying to get somewhere, trying to do something, trying to accomplish something. And there's going to be a day where the happening isn't happening anymore, or it's near ending, and all you're going to want is for it to happen. And so I think there's something about this conversation just poetically, why don't you just let it happen? Just stop, let it happen. Because you know what? Maybe you're just taking it all for granted. Maybe this is the most beautiful thing ever right now as existence is. And we had a talk actually last night. We were hanging out, and I remember we were talking about, I've shared this story on the podcast before, making a sandwich with my friend and how beautiful that was. And it's I was thinking about it. I was like, that was an incredibly amazing moment. Was it better than other moments necessarily, but it was the pinnacle of perfect moments, just like there are other moments that are like the pinnacle of perfect moments, and to compare them is almost fleeting and pointless. But there was the reason why I remember that moment so much is because I was in the happening of the moment, and I almost want it to exist forever. But it does exist forever. That's the weird thing about it. It does exist forever. The thing is just that I noticed it happening, And so that's why I remember it. But it's like there's so many times I'm so busy off doing something else that I don't acknowledge the happening, the wordless experience of what this is. And like I talk about it, it's funny because even as I'm saying it out loud now, I'm like, this is so interesting. I'm talking about making a sandwich with my friend. And people are like, who the fuck cares? But it's like, yeah, who does care? Because that doesn't sum it up at all. You don't understand. You don't understand because you had to be there. And it was one of the most beautiful moments in my life. It was just making a fucking sandwich. Like, what? And I think this is the thing that, this conversation is just, it's pointing that out to me. I find that fascinating. I don't know what else you got to say, but I'll pass it on.
Yeah. I mean, because I've heard that story several times about this day of making a sandwich, and for anyone who's hasn't heard the story, just some of the details that I remember that are relevant for this conversation are that, again, stopping to really be with something. As far as I understand that day, you and this person, you stopped for a second and you asked yourselves a question. What would be the most amazing sandwich to eat? And you went out and you got everything that the two of you came up with, and you got all the ingredients. You can't like you just, you really went into it, and it's not just a sandwich anymore, right? There's something else entirely. There's like a shared experience. And that experience left a mark. It did something to you, right? And, it's interesting that sort of phrase has come up in this, because it's one that I say to my students all the time, which, essentially it is, as far as art is concerned, one of the highest aims of it is for it to do something to you, right? And to extend that even further, it's to do something to you that's not in your control, right? It's out of your hands. And in many ways, the job of, I'll just say, for actors is, how do you create the conditions for that thing to happen to you, right? Where this performance, this thing is happening to you. You're not doing it; it's doing you, as my teacher used to say. Like, that's kind of the pinnacle of performance in acting, is this thing's doing something to you that's out of your control, and you're along for the ride in that whole thing. And a word that came up for me in what you were saying, because we've been using this word inertia, but progress. We're caught in this. We are caught in this. I don't know if illusion is the right word. It's one of the right words. It's not the entire picture of it, but we are caught in this illusion of progress in our lives, where it's just like everything is about progress all the time. Always have to be progressing to what? I don't know, but we have to continue to make the progress, right? And that turns into a lot of there's a lot of traps there, and there's a lot of delusions that happen there, because, for one, a lot of things that we could think of as progress from another point of view are really horrible. There's a lot of things that have been done in the name of progress, and in some respects you can see it that way, but you can also, progress also has a shadow very often. And one of those things is this constant pursuit of progress keeps us from being present. We're never with the life that's happening in front of us, and we're not really with it. So that's one of these things that's the inertia. We're in the inertia of progress. And I like that word that you used. I'm trying to remember what it was. It wasn't interruption. I feel like it was an R word. Oh, but it was, it carried with it, as far as I understand, like the, I wish I could remember what it was. I'm trying, because like I've already said interrupt, and it wasn't quite that. It had It had a quality to it. It'll drive me nuts, but maybe it'll come back. I have to listen back to the podcast later. But yeah, that was a thing that at least came to my mind is just progress, and how that is progress is the idea of progress is the enemy of presence. I don't know if that's like a complete truth through and through, but I think that there's definitely some kind of a link there. But we should probably wrap this one up. As fascinating as a conversation as this has been, we should probably do that thing. So you were on beer today. I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Well, this is an India Pale Ale from Bowen Island Brewing Company called the Artisan IPA.
Straight into the point.
Delicious. I don't know. I like it. You know, when things like, I don't know, maybe it's because we're on the West Coast and it's easily accessible to us, but this is probably my favorite beer that I've had from them, I think. And I just fucking really appreciate that they make a good beer and they don't charge you an arm and a leg for it. Like, I just feel like it's very reasonably priced. I mean, I would pay more for it. But I appreciate the fact that I can get a good beer for a relatively inexpensive price, and I could just have a good beer. And it's like light and flavorful. And like when I had my first sip, like it's funny, I've had a lot of this beer recently, but like also when I had my first sip today, I was just like, man, this is a good beer. This just tastes good. And I was like, appreciate that. So anyway, I imagine, I've never been to the actual brewery, but I imagine they're a pretty small brewery because, Bowen Island's pretty small. And I just say you guys are knocking it out of the park. If you ever hear this, I appreciate you. So that's what I got.
And as far as I understand, the Bowen Island Brewery is no longer located in Bowen Island. I think it's like in Squamish or something. It's not on the island anymore. They got they got too popular to stay there. They had to expand operations. But yes, it's a good one. They're and they've been around for a while too. And I echo all your sentiments, as far as like not like a beer that's not breaking the bank and is not some kind of, shall we say, giant corporate swill.
Yeah.
They put out a great product for the buck, and I definitely I reach for them on occasion, just like, yeah, something simple and easy and tastes good. So yeah, it's been great. I agree. I think that their IPA is one of their best.
Mm-hmm. You have any final thoughts?
Oh man. I mean, yeah, stop and smell the roses. Yeah, as the expression goes, that's, that expression that saying has been with us for a very long time, and it says everything about what we're talking about here. And it's really just about getting present, taking time to appreciate these little things that are all around us, all the time, and really taking time to just notice them. And when we really notice things, there's a kind of magic that can appear, where things are no longer just this. It's just a flower. It's just a tree. It's just a chair. It's just a lamp. It's just like, let's get those justs out of our language, because there is no, it's just anything. Like it's just is I don't want to say lazy. I'm not a big fan of that word. There's something very judgmental about it, but it's saying that is, there's something about that there's something so sad about that. And when we remove that just from our thinking and we can become more present with things, I think that we restore a lot of our sense of wonder and curiosity about things. Because also thinking this is something that I think we really just kind of touched on for a second, but everything's changing all the time too. Like it's, and you'll notice these things, like there's change and there's life and there's things that you didn't notice before that are there, like you could revisit the same thing over and over and over again. It's like watching a great movie, and there's all of these things. It's like that you didn't see the first 2, 3, 4, however many times you saw it. Like there's new things that you can see and experience, and things that can do something to you. I think that we truly want that. Like we as human beings, maybe secretly we all kind of want something that's just wakes us up, that does something to us that's not the monotony of our autopilot. Just do something, smack me out of this stupor, and bring me back into the eyes and mind of wonder.
You were talking about, the word just, and it's kind of like that word is a minimizer, minimizes things. And it dawned on me, I'm like, yeah, we're always reducing everything down to something meaningless. I was like, what? Of course we're fucking depressed and upset and worked up. Everything's fucking meaningless. We're always constantly reducing. Oh yeah, that's a picture. Yeah, it's some flower. You know what I mean? Like it's like constantly happening. And I feel like something we've been talking about a lot recently, I think on the podcast and off, has been presence. That's been a really big theme that we seem to be just kind of working our way through. We're like chewing on it like a nice bite of steak, just kind of, what is this? Oh, it tastes good. Like, let's and pulling what we can from it. And, a month or two ago, I don't know what was going on. I mean, I was like in massive worry and stress and anxiety, like to the point of dread. I was feeling dread. I'm like, what the fuck? This can't work. I can't stay in this state of dread. This is horrible. And, I would say that I started to get present and I like remedied it, like fixed it. And I think what started happening was I started paying attention to things that I appreciated, things that I was grateful for, things that were beautiful. I started to like, and I feel like that's such an artist thing to do. It's like, what's beautiful about this? And it's like, I get how there's a certain quality of like, that's airy fairy. Like it's kind of like, hippy dippy, as you said earlier. But I do think it's kind of like, actually, it's more like vital to like, look at your partner and be like, what's beautiful about this person, or your pet, or your, or just your hand, whatever. And just like, what's fucking awesome about this? And that's kind of presence, right? That's like a moment of just like, and like, as we've been having this conversation, I don't know why I feel like at some point I needed to share this, but I was walking through the forest a couple weeks ago, big, massive, well, pretty big hike, like 11 or 12 or 14 kilometers, somewhere around there. And I remember at one point I came across this tree. And the tree had clearly fallen over and there was like a stump, but it was like pretty high up. And then there was a little tree growing out of it. And I just, oh, it's so beautiful. This little tree, and it's starting its journey like way up on top of another tree that kind of like died. And I was like, just a cool thing to notice. And I feel like that's kind of life, right? It's like life is just all around us. There's all this incredible shit happening all the time. And if we're always on the progress train, like, where am I going? What am I doing? What's happening? Where are we getting? You miss out on all this stuff. And I think that progress is cool. I think it's important. I think there's certain elements of it we want to embrace, we want to do. But I feel like if you're feeling depressed or like discouraged or like life is not wondrous, wondrous, I guess is one of my made up words, but wondrous, wonderful, if it's not this magic thing, it's time to stop the progress train and get on the presence train, get on the, hey, where are we? What's happening? Like what's, and, at a certain point too, like, I think you have to kind of acknowledge the fact that like, who cares where you get? How about we enjoy the ride a little bit, like at least then look out the window every now and then, like take it in a little bit, right? And I feel like this conversation is a bit about that. And where I think it's most useful and practical, and I thought this even before we started talking about it, is that if we can kind of stop inertia every now and then, I think we do ourselves a wonderful favor, because we can get back into the inertia and the progress of moving forward and doing things, but we can start again on the right foot. Because I think progress, unchecked for long periods of time, gets off track. And I think presence gets you back into the true moment, and then you can start again, but start on track. And you might fall off track again, but then the key is come back to the moment, be present again, experience it, and then start again. And like, one last thing, Evan, I'll share this story. Two lumberjacks go out and cut down wood every day. One lumberjack's this young, brawny, like strong kid, and the other one's this old man who's like kind of maybe even a little decrepit looking. And they both come back each day, and every day the older man has cut down more wood than the young man. And the young man looks at the older man. He's like, "What the hell?" And he works harder and works harder. And he can never cut down as much wood as the older man. Finally, he humbles himself. He goes to the older man. "I don't get it, man. Like, I don't understand how you're cutting more wood. It just doesn't make sense to me." And he goes, "What do you do all day?" And the older man goes, "Well, I go and I cut down some wood for a couple hours, and then I sit down and I sharpen my saw for an hour. And I cut down some more wood for an hour, too, and then I sharpen my saw." And basically, I think the moral of the lesson is when you stop in your presence, you're sharpening your saw. And you're going to just find that progress is easier and life is more fun. And I wish that upon anybody.
Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.